Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Our session today is titled Evidence-Based in What Works Clearinghouse to ESSA Tiers of Evidence. Our presenters will be grounding the work in the Nebraska context. Joining us today are Doug Van Dyne, Christy Fedden. Christy, come off mute so I can say it right.
It's Fedden. You're good. Thank you.
And Lindsay Fryatt. Lindsay and Christy are both regional leads with Nebraska MTSS. They focus on building out an equitable framework of supports for all districts in Nebraska as they develop their MTSS framework to support all students, families, and staff. Doug is a senior researcher at Marzano Research. He leads the work under the Regional Educational Laboratory Central Contract for Nebraska. His work focuses on educator evaluation, algebra readiness, rural education, post-secondary readiness, and educator effectiveness. Doug has spent 15 years teaching middle and high school mathematics and 3 years as a school administrator. Presenters, take it away. And thank you, Christy. I want to honor you by making sure that I pronounce your name correctly. That's what we should do with our students, and I want to model that here.
Thank you. So Christy and Lindsay, we've already been introduced. I think I can then go on, right? I'm Doug Van Dyne. Am I sharing my screen? It looks like I still am. I work for Marzano Research, and we hold the contract for Rel Central. And I know some of you from around here from work that we've done in Nebraska. We work with the 7 states in the central region, Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming, and support database decision-making, evidence-based resources, and applied research in those states. Today, we're going to be taking a look at What Works Clearinghouse and connecting what's there to ESSA, as well as looking at some Nebraska-specific resources that the MTSS group has done or that we've done with Nebraska teams. The idea here is taking this phrase, levels of evidence, and how do we really make sense of it across the different contexts where we hear it. So we're going to look at What Works Clearinghouse and ESSA. We're going to look at how to find, how to align what's on there with ESSA a little bit. And then we're going to look at some social construct data and the things we should be talking to districts and educators about to really understand what evidence-based means. And I want to start here because this is where the conversation with our partners at the Nebraska Department of Education began. There are different aspects of what we do in education that are identified as being evidence-based. There are evidence-based programs, there are evidence-based practices, and there are evidence-based activities. And each one has a different role in what we do. And I put some definitions up here that are ones that are common at NDE across different departments. And I bring this up because one of the conversations and kind of the starting place that we have with educators about evidence-based is that we have people say, I have an evidence-based program. And I'm going to use this piece of it in my classroom. And because it's part of this evidence-based program, this little piece I can consider evidence-based, which isn't always the case, because if you take a little piece of something, it doesn't always have the same impact that an entire program does. And I think one of the conversations we need to have with educators or people in our districts is just because we have a program that's evidence-based doesn't mean I can pick up any little piece and part of that and use it someplace else. And that little part is also going to have the same evidence base as the entire program does. Flip side, if I have an activity that's evidence-based, I can't just pick it up and use it anywhere. I need to think about how it fits into the larger picture. A phrase that we often use when we talk about things like this is the difference between a productive adaptation and a lethal mutation. A productive adaptation keeps all of the underlying goals and objectives intact, and therefore helps maintain the evidence base. But a lethal mutation changes the focus of the activity or changes the focus of something so that now becomes something different than it was originally intended. And that lethal mutation often moves away from being supported by evidence. So I think that's a great conversation to start with, is making sure we understand those three levels and helping people understand those different pieces. As we get started in our conversation about evidence-based, I want to ask this question, and we're going to do a little Mentimeter activity. If I can figure out how to get my screen in the right spot. Where do you find evidence-based resources to align with ESSA tiers of evidence? So I just want to kind of get a sense of where we are as a group. So on a browser, on your phone, if you go to menti.com and type in this code 59192688, you should get a screen that asks you to type in up to 3 phrases. We're going to create a little word cloud to get a sense of where we are as a starting point. Just give one more minute for people to get their answers in. And I like what I'm seeing here. A lot of what we're Clearinghouse, IES, REL, as well as Nebraska MTSS. So really, really nice things. Really great resources for finding evidence-based resources. Great, thank you. So we're going to start today on What Works Clearinghouse, and it looks like many of you have already been there, which is great to see. And I'm going to point out some things on What Works Clearinghouse that you may not have noticed, that provide some resources and supports for talking about levels of evidence. Some of you may have seen this. I think it was added to the calendar invite. This is something we at REL Central developed for NDE as we were working on the practice guide summaries that are part of the Nebraska Reads and the math resources. Because the conversation started, wait, we have levels of evidence all over the place. When we go into Weber's Clearinghouse, we see levels of evidence. When we see ESSA, we see tiers of evidence. When we see the practice guides, we also see levels of evidence. How do they all connect? So we created this crosswalk, which is a great handout, just to kind of show how each one defines a level of evidence. ESSA has 4 tiers. So strong would be tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4. The practice guides actually only have 3. So they have strong, moderate, and then minimal. But you can see here that there's a lot of similarity in how they describe things, but there are some nuanced differences. So we helped NDE put this together just as a resource to help people understand what does What Works Clearinghouse mean when they say strong evidence. The nice thing is there is some connectivity. So if something in a practice guide is identified as being supported by strong evidence, it generally aligns with a tier 1 support in ESSA. With the more recent practice guides, if you go back through, as What Works Clearinghouse has gone through and revised things, they have different handbooks for defining things. So basically, under version 2.1 and higher, I think we're at 4.1 now. Anything that is strong in a practice guide is also a tier 1 ESSA. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Kim, this did get into the calendar invite, correct? So people have access to it?
It'll be placed as a handout on the NDE's website at the end after all of the presentation materials have been collected.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. So switching now to What Works Clearinghouse. What Works Clearinghouse is this website. And I think I can't keep up with all of what's happening in chat and what's happening around here. So Betsy's going to put.
Don't worry, Doug, I'm monitoring the chat.
So Betsy's going to put this link in here just so everyone has it in case you want to sign on there yourself. The first thing I want to point out is there are great resources here. What Works Clearinghouse is really making an effort to align things with ESSA and provide supports for making connections to ESSA, because they understand that that's where teachers are. Teachers need to provide supports that align with ESSA tiers, and so they're trying to provide resources. The first one is down here in this resources section. If you click on this little, it looks like a play button, it takes you to this resources. And the second one are some videos that talk about how to align What Works Clearinghouse resources with ESSA tiers of evidence. So they're great resources that are already made, videos you can pick up and kind of share, and they really start the conversation. They provide a foundation for people to say, oh, I kind of see how they're starting to align. When you dig further into the What Works Clearinghouse, one of the great things is that it is a great way to find resources. So I can find resources that are evidence-based on literacy, mathematics, science, and behavior. And if you click on any one of these, say we start with literacy, it provides a whole list of resources that have been reviewed by What Works Clearinghouse, and they provide information about, what really is the research behind these? How do they really support what's in the classroom? I've seen a lot of these online, but how can I really talk to my principal or my teachers or my parents about what really is the evidence behind this? So if we look at one, say we look at Read 180. And you click on that, it brings you in and it gives you a bunch of information here. Talks about the different outcome domains that were a part of the research behind this. One of the nice things that What Works Clearinghouse has started to do is they provide these evidence snapshots that dig into things a little bit deeper, give you a lot of information here. So I'm going to talk through these a little bit. Let me see, get back to my PowerPoint here somehow. So for example, reading recovery is one where they've gone through and actually assigned the ESSA tiers. They haven't done this with every resource, but they're starting to do this. So if you click on reading recovery, it takes you into the study piece. You notice that there are 2 studies that supported alphabetics, 2 studies that supported comprehension, and 2 that supported reading achievement. If you click on one of the studies and then go to, say, this one, it'll provide some information about that actual study. And they've started to do things like this, to say, hey, look, if you look at the evidence behind this intervention, it's going to align with ESSA Tier 1 based on the level of evidence, based on the sample size. And so you'll see these little icons start to appear as What Works Clearinghouse goes through and develops these. Now, you may notice on here that this particular study only had 79 students. To meet ESSA Tier 1, it has to have at least 350. So they've assigned this with Tier 1 because all of the studies that they looked at together have 350 students total. And that's one of the things that falls under ESSA. It doesn't have to be one study that has 350. It has to be, it can be a bunch of studies that together meet What Works Clearinghouse criteria, and the total sample across all of those studies is 350. Does that make sense? So I share that because I don't want people to just say, hey, wait, this has 79 students, so it fits. That's not the case. It fits because of all the other studies that are there. And if I go back to the findings tab, you'll see, you'll see the same thing. There's a little icon down here that shows that it's ESSA Tier 1. So as you dig into an intervention, it doesn't show it on the main page because it's more aligned with individual studies. You can dig in a little bit and say, hey, if I look at this, the evidence here supports ESSA Tier 1, ESSA Tier 2, ESSA Tier 3. And I want to point out that What Works Clearinghouse is just starting on this process, so it's not there for every resource, but they are working on it, and it'll show up more and more and more. I point this out because What Works Clearinghouse is a great resource. And what they do is really focused on making sure that resources are evidence-based. What I find with teachers that I talk to is they prefer sites like Teachers Pay Teachers, which I understand the expediency. I understand the value of having things that are created by other educators, but there's not always the research behind those to really show that they work. And that's where What Works Clearinghouse comes in and provides more of a basis for us to stand on to make sense of things. Any questions about how to navigate this or what we look at as we go through the What Works Clearinghouse? All right, then I'm going to give you your first task, and we're going to go out into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes to work on it, just to give you some hands-on experience and some time to talk to each other. Here's a scenario. You have a school in your region that's asked you about a supplemental math program called Fraction Face-Off. They want to use it, but they want to know, is this something that's going to meet criteria for ESSA Tier 1, ESSA Tier 2? Is there evidence to support that? So how do you provide that? How do you find that information? And what are you going to share with them? That's kind of your task. And Betsy put it in the chat box, and I believe the chat box does follow us into breakout rooms. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Everyone understand their task? Give me a thumbs up if it makes sense. Ideas here, little information. So this says, you click on this improvement index that says, it's the effect of an intervention. The improvement index can be interpreted as the expected change in percentile rank for an average comparison group student. So based on this intervention, you can expect that an average student will increase 24 percentile points in general mathematics achievement, or increase 33 percentile points. So basically a percentile is the rank. And you think the 50th percentile is where the average or the mean is. And so if you go up 24 percentile points, you're going from 50%, a student at the 50 percentile to almost the 75th percentile. Does that make sense? So it really is a good amount of gain there.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yep. One of the things that was shared in our group was the fact that Walworth Clearinghouse has lots of good information on it, and people go here and then they still say, but I want to hear what somebody who's used it says. They put a lot of stock into what their colleagues say. So trying to get the shift to believing that Walworth Clearinghouse has some merit in what they say is a challenge. And that's the conversation. The more we show it, the more used to it they're going to become. Any other thoughts? Anything else that was shared? So do you think this is a good recommendation, a good intervention for districts to use?
Yes, the only thing I noticed was it's just for 4th grade. I mean, I'm assuming you can expand it to more grades than that, but a lot of the heavy lifting and statistical analysis has been done for you, which earned it the 1.
Which earned it the 1, but it is important that the study was only done in 4th grade. And this is what I see happen a lot. People go on to websites like this and they see something and they say, hey, I can use that, without thinking about, does it really make sense? So understanding that this study was only done with grade 4 students, and if you go back to the main page in Walworth Clearinghouse, they only recommend it for grade 4. If people want to use it at grade 2 or grade 3, there should be some hesitancy there to say, not that it doesn't work, but the evidence only supports grade 4. So that's the kind of conversation we want to start having with people, that just because it's on a website doesn't mean that it's great to pick up and use. Just like with our students, just because they do a Google search and they find something on a website doesn't mean that they can just put it down and use it. And there was way back when there was the whole thing about the tree octopuses. Do you remember that whole, if you did a Google search, you could find a whole articles about tree octopus that people had put online that was totally fictitious, but students found it through Google search and said, it's got to be true. So having people think about the resources that they find on these websites is part of the conversation. That's kind of where we're starting today, is not that they aren't evidence-based, but what evidence does support them.
Doug, can I ask a question about that?
Yep.
The studies that were done with fraction face-off, same group of researchers, does that mean they only studied 4th grade, or did they study more grades and only find that the 4th grade one was tier 1?
Okay, so Walworth Clearinghouse has criteria for including a study.
Right.
You know, it has to meet those criteria. It has to show direct impact on students. This is the only study that met their criteria for this particular intervention. So it doesn't mean that other studies weren't done, but I meant this is the only study that met the criteria for Walworth Clearinghouse to include it in an intervention report.
Perfect.
Does that make
Thanks.
sense?
Yes, thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions? I'm going to turn it over to our Nebraska MTSS team to begin sharing some of the Nebraska specific resources that they have.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're excited to be discussing this very important topic and conversation. And Lindsay and I are here today to just share a couple of resources and to make that direct connection back to what Doug has been sharing with us. So just a little bit of quick background. In Nebraska, we're working through our regional MTSS model. And we collaborate with our ESUs, we collaborate with districts to create that deeply implemented system of support. So I know Tamika mentioned that earlier as she was introducing us. But within that system, our educators have to have access to the most effective tools and resources. We can't afford to waste the teacher's time, nor can we waste the student's time. So that's really at the crux of why we're really very interested and excited about this partnership. So I am going to do a quick screen share here and take you to our website. And I believe, yep, the link is in the chat for you. So on our Nebraska MTSS website, we wanted to start and just point out a couple of things really quickly. So as we're talking about finding the evidence behind resources and tools for instruction and to support our students and staff, that falls within our 6 essential elements for Nebraska MTSS. And you can see over here, we have an evidence-based practices, curriculum, instruction, intervention, and assessment. So that's the most obvious essential element where utilizing this resource and these tools would live. But we know that we need the evidence-based practices that permeate throughout all of our layers of our system. So we wanted to point out where those essential elements live. And again, this is the framework for MTSS. So you're welcome to explore that section of our website. But we wanted to make a direct link today to one of our tools, and Lindsay's going to share a little bit more about our program comparison tool, and I'll kind of drive us through the website here.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. So like she said, we're going to show the program comparison tool, and some of you, I see many familiar names and faces on the call today, so some of you might be familiar with our program comparison tool, but we wanted to just show how to find the tool on our website and talk a little bit about it. So you'll go under the resources section there that she's showing there on the screen, and then click on the program comparison tool, and it will pull up a really an excellent tool for kind of doing similar to what we just did just now, what we walked through with the breakout session. So this tool really is going to look at different programs. You can click on the blue button there and it will pull up the tool. You can narrow down by different types of programs, whether it's math, ELA, social emotional behavioral. You can filter by skill, grade level, population. There are a whole bunch of different filters if you're looking for something specific. You can also search out a specific program. So if the math program that we were, now it's fraction face-off, it almost escaped me, but if fraction face-off was something that you wanted to look up, you could look up and see if it was on here. If it's not, like it comes up there, it's not one of the programs that we have on our program comparison tool, then you can submit a tool or a program to our chart. And this is researched by our grad assistants. They are doctoral students who help complete the research studies on these different tools that are linked here. So we really kind of, and they really focus on doing kind of a cross connection between the ESSA and What Works Clearinghouse and making sure that all of it aligns with what we've gone through previously in our time together today. So you'll be able to find just the different things about the demographics, the populations that it's meant for, the skills, and the ESSA tiers of evidence right there. And then if it's an evidence-based practice, it'll say that there, and then any additional research summaries. And then there's a nice spot right here to look at third-party critiques as well. So you can find quite a bit of information to use for yourself or share out with your schools. And then real quickly, how to submit. So for that example with fraction face-off, we don't have that on here. So if that was something that a district came to you and said, I'm going to use this fraction face-off, and you couldn't find it on our website and you wanted to have access to that, you can click the submit program request. And it'll take you to a link where you can submit that program to be researched and added to our program comparison tool. It is important. This is not a list of approved or ones that we, Nebraska MTSS, support, or a list that we think you should pick from. It's simply a list of programs that have been submitted. And so there may be some on here that have insufficient evidence. There may be some that are wonderful and have a lot of evidence, but it's basically just any program that has been submitted for research by our team. So we just want to note that if you can't find something on there, to submit the program, because we want it to be, you know, as many programs on here as possible, to make it really valuable and really reflective of the programs that your schools are exploring out in the field of students.
Yeah. Any questions about any of those? We wanted to, again, make that direct link to some of the work that's underway across our state and a resource that's available to you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Great, thank you very much. So again, our goal today is to really help educators critically think about these resources and help us to kind of frame conversations with them. Another great resource that's available through What Was Clearinghouse are their practice guides. And this is a lot of the work that we've been doing in Nebraska, is helping develop some practice guide summaries and really make these more accessible to educators across Nebraska. On the What Was Clearinghouse website, if you click on the practice guides piece, it takes you to all of the practice guides. They've done a lot of them. And they really are, the idea of these is they pull together a group of researchers from across the country who have expertise in this area. They comb through all of the research and come up with recommendations that are based on those research that teachers can use in their classroom. But again, the conversation comes up with, well, how do I connect this to ESSA? I need an intervention for this particular child that's ESSA Tier 1, ESSA Tier 2. How do I make sure the intervention really fits that? On this site, you'll see right in this middle here, they have two infographics that they put together, one for elementary and one for secondary. And if you click on that, what it does is they've taken, in this case, the elementary practice guides, and they say there are 4 recommendations in this particular practice guide. These 2 recommendations align with Tier 1 ESSA. This one aligns with Tier 2. This one aligns with Tier 4. And so on and so forth for the elementary ones. Again, it's right here above the practice guides themselves. Click on it, for example, secondary. And it's a great resource to say, this is in the practice guide. This one has 3 recommendations. One is Tier 1, one is Tier 2, and one is Tier 4. Great resource. Everyone able to find that? We've done something similar with Nebraska. For the Nebraska Reads, on the Nebraska Reads sites, there's the section called Practice Guide Summaries, where we've taken all the literacy practice guides and created these practice guide summaries, which hopefully you guys have seen across the state. Each practice guide summary takes a practice guide and creates a little summary for each recommendation. So this practice guide has 5 recommendations in it. There's a summary for each recommendation that provides a great snapshot of what's in the practice guide itself. Up at the top here, you'll see this Intro to Nebraska Guide, Practice Guide Summaries. This is a resource we created for NDE that shows a quick overview on the front of the practice guide summaries, but on the back, it provides this little chart that's hard to see. Pulls out from that first resource that I showed you, alignment across practice guide and ESSA in terms of how they define levels. But then down here, it says for each recommendation, what is the level of evidence in the practice guide? What ESSA tier does it align with? Well, again, the idea is ESSA at this point means more to teachers than What Was Clearinghouse at levels of evidence do. So providing that bridge between what's happening at What Was Clearinghouse and ESSA tiers to really support teachers in their classroom. Questions, comments, thoughts?
I just want to add, again, this just really reiterates the work that we're doing in regard to developing these strong systems of support for all learners. And again, going back to, we can't afford to, to encourage staff or to, kind of stand by and not have everyone using the most well-proven strategies, I guess, is the best way to put that. So these have been really helpful in our work, and we're trying to push these out as much as possible in collaboration with our ESUs and with districts. So they're amazing.
Can I pop in?
Yes.
I clicked on one of the PDFs for the fraction math one. And I think something that's really important to note too is who the studies have been done with. I think the Fuchs study had, close to 1,200 students on it. But when I got down into the infographic, only 10% of that sample was special education.
Mm-hmm.
So I always go to, how do we teach people how to be data literate or to really look closer at what things say? Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Mickey. I didn't plant you in there, but that's exactly the next conversation we want to have. So first of all, is it evidence-based? What esoteric does it align with? But then the second conversation, and maybe a more interesting conversation, is does the evidence really support the students that I have in my classroom? So looking at that social construct data, that's again part of what WABC provides. Again, I'm going to go back into the literacy, the reading 180, just so we can kind of look at this really quickly. If you click on the evidence snapshot on any one of these interventions, this is where you went, Mickey, I believe. Over on the right-hand side, it gives you a snapshot of all of the sample that was used for the study. So if we look at this, supporting Read 180, 66% of the sample was Black, 30% was white, 5% was non-specified. Again, 60% Hispanic, 40% non-Hispanic. Pretty good balance between male and female, 28% English language learners. People often don't look at this. So if you look at the sample that was used for this study, would you say that this is representative of districts in Nebraska or in your region? What do you think? What kind of conversation would you have with a district about this?
I would say that probably most of Nebraska, we're a pretty Caucasian state, and 82% free and reduced lunch is really high. So I don't know how I would have I think I would just be, raise an awareness to look at the demographics of the study.
Yep. And that's exactly what we want you to do. It's not to say, no, you can't use this. But it is to say, if I look at this, in my mind, it says it was probably done in an urban setting based on the demographics that isn't typical of most districts in Nebraska. Maybe Omaha and Lincoln are somewhat similar, but overall, the sample here doesn't clearly align with Nebraska. So the conversation isn't don't use it. The conversation is let's be aware of this and let's just be cautious. Doesn't mean it's not going to work for my students, but it does mean I need to think about the sample that was used here. Similarly, if you dig into one of the studies itself, they give you another little snapshot for that particular study. So again, we want to help educators become educated consumers of what's online. It's not just click and say, here, someone says this is evidence-based, I can use it in my classroom. We want to help them become more informed consumers of the data and understand really what does it mean to look at the evidence here. And that's kind of where we wanted to focus our thoughts here today. As we wrap up, in the practice guides themselves, if you go to the appendices, which is an area which a lot of people don't go to, there's always an appendix called Rationale for the Evidence Rating. And in there, there's a section called Eligible Population that talks about if we put all the studies together that were used to support the recommendations in the practice guide, this is what the sample looks like. So again, being informed consumers. So thanks for bringing that up, Mickey. That's exactly where we wanted to go. I'm going to say thank you for your time today. Hopefully this was helpful in pointing out some resources that are out there, in thinking about things we want to start to have conversations about. This was part one. This was step one in the process. And we're going to continue in April with a conversation led by our Nebraska MTSS team that I'm going to turn them over to talk about.
Yes, thank you, Doug. And so many of you have already suggested today, it's one thing to identify high quality instructional materials and resources, but it's something entirely different to actually put those into play. And we know so many of you do that on a daily basis and in collaboration with schools, or even John in the breakout room was so eloquent when he said, you know, we need to move away from what you like or what you want to really looking at the evidence and putting that into play. So that's really what April 15th is about. So don't get confused and think that that's just the day you're going to submit your taxes. It's actually the day we're going to follow up and have this really rich discussion about the questions that you see here on the screen. We will have a panel of folks that are just doing this work on a daily basis, where we'll have an opportunity to share ideas and strategies and to focus on these issues, the challenges. How do you overcome the challenges? For those of us that are serving as a support role or collaborating with districts, once we're invited to join, how do we present this information and have conversations that really respects where districts are at that point in the process, but also pushes them to do what's best for students within their district. And one of the other considerations, we know that right now we're making a lot of decisions based on probably not the most effective system of data-based problem solving and decision making, because we lack substantive data at this point. So how are we having some of these conversations? We'll be addressing all of these things and more. So we'll look forward to seeing you all on April 15th in the afternoon.
So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Lunch and Learn on Wednesday, March 24th, where we will discuss being an informed data consumer, and at our next learning community on Thursday, April 15th. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.